This week's pubcast question comes from Bob Heiler. Let's go.
Hi, John. It's Bob Heiler. So my question is, are there situations today where you'd still recommend multiple campaigns, and why?
Great question, Bob. So Bob's a longtime member of my Power Hitters Club elite community, and he's awesome. Now, I know Bob's asking this because I'm always talking about a simplified approach to campaign construction. And sometimes it just doesn't seem reasonable to create just one campaign. But far too often, advertisers overcomplicate things when they don't need to and make their results worse. In a high percentage of these situations, they'd be better off with a single campaign and ad set. While I recommend prioritizing a simplified approach, there are always exceptions when you'll want to add complexity. So, I want to answer Bob's question about creating separate campaigns and the thought process behind it. And before I answer that, let's talk about a common situation when advertisers create separate campaigns and probably don't need to. Creative testing. Now, this is an old school approach to create these separate campaigns just for testing, and I get generally why people do it. They want to have a separate campaign that forces budget to individual ads so they can see what works and what doesn't. But I find this approach so counterproductive, especially for anything other than the highest budgets. This is partially because of the way things work today and how our main goal is to give Meta as many creative assets as possible to assemble the right ad for the right person. So I've talked about this a lot separately, and I won't go into all the details here. But the main thing is that a much more efficient approach now is to use the creative testing tool in the main ad set where the ads will live after the test is over. A recent podcast episode was on that topic. So when should you create separate campaigns? The obvious example would be when you have multiple business goals that you want to dedicate budget to. So you might have a leads campaign to build your email list and a sales campaign to increase revenue. But even then, I say that you should only do this if you have the budget to get volume and optimal results from each campaign. Unless you're creating a separate campaign based on the objective, many of the reasons behind creating separate ad sets and separate campaigns are the same. So, if you have business goals to promote more than one product or product line that require dedicated budget, you might keep them separate. You'd separate them either by campaign or ad set. Or you need to promote multiple locations for your business. So you need to dedicate separate budget to each location. But even in these cases, you know what I'm going to say, you need to have the budget to efficiently drive results in each campaign or ad set. If not, you're just making results worse for the sake of complexity. Now, another example would be related to targeting. I don't want to waste much time talking about creating separate ad sets based on things like detailed targeting and lookalike audiences, because that approach is just so outdated now. But it still happens, as much as I hate to see it. Just remember that interests, behaviors, and lookalike audiences are only used as suggestions when optimizing for a conversion. You're wasting your time by separating them, and you're likely making results worse. But another time it comes up is related to remarketing and prospecting. Yes, Meta prioritizes remarketing automatically now, so you don't need to isolate them to show Meta which people to target. But the one problem can be Meta spending too much of your budget on remarketing. Now, this isn't going to be an issue for most brands, but the problem can happen for brands with huge remarketing audiences or if their product is such that prospecting is vastly more profitable. You could attempt to control this by separating your remarketing and prospecting. While you could do this with separate campaigns, I'd prefer separate ad sets. And then you'd establish a set budget for each. The bottom line is that you should prioritize minimizing unnecessary campaigns and ad sets. If you're going to create a separate campaign, ask yourself why. Make sure there's a clear business goal or problem to solve, and understand the risks of splitting things up and watering down your budget. Thanks for your question, Bob. You want your question to be answered on a future episode? Send it my way. Go to johnloomer.com/question and record your question today. You may just be featured on a future podcast. Otherwise, thanks for joining me again today. Until next time, do awesome things.
I'm out.